just has all these amazing kind of fond, loving stories about what a warm person he is, and but it's all kind of got lost and forgotten about.
And for anybody who's wondering, just switching this on, we're not talking about Piers Morgan or anyone like that. It's yeah. This is welcome to In the Abyss, by the way. This is the Ozzy Osbourne Appreciation Week, basically. I'm not going to say anything, to be honest with you. I'm going to just kind of Bean's back with us because Padre's still on a world tour, and I think I'm just going to hand it over to Bean because this was Bean's idea. And yes, alcohol was taken when we discussed this, but there is a specific reason why we want to do this week. So, yeah, hitter of things. Welcome back, and the floor
Thank
is
you.
yours, mate.
Well, look, I'll try and explain. I'll try and recount the conversation we have as best as I could. I think we were having a text conversation. I was at a gig or something. I don't know, on my way back from band practice or something like that. Listening to music as I usually do, and I was actually listening to. I mean, it's not so new anymore. It's not brand new, but Ozzy's latest album, Patient Number 9. Dead and Gone was the track I was listening to actually, and I had a few beers and I was getting a little bit just I guess sentimental and nostalgic because Ozzy's been a huge influence on me and the music I listen to, and I got into Ozzy when I was 16, 17 years old, I think. Anyway, so I'm listening to Dead and Gone off the new album, and I'm thinking, man, this is great. I mean, this is really good. It reminded me of the stuff he put out when he was doing like the Ultimate Sin era. It's quite poppy, it's high end, it's polished rock music. So let's make no bones about that. But I just thought this is great, and the album's great, and I really liked Ordinary Man as well, and I genuinely think the stuff that he's putting out now with Andrew Watt is good stuff. And it got me thinking. I kind of went down this wormhole of I don't think Ozzy gets fairly judged these days. And I think it's fair to say a lot of metalheads have got a lot of love and affection for that what we refer to as like the classic era, Blizzard of Oz, Diary of a Madman, all that stuff. Of course they do. It's fucking amazing. I mean, Diary of a Madman for me is just an insanely good album. Anyway, so I'm thinking about this, and I think then the Osbournes happened, and I think the damage that did was, I think it raised the profile of kind of Sharon and the rest of the family, and they seem to become the main focus, and for reasons that we won't go into because everyone's talked about it and talked about it and talked about it. I don't think Sharon is a particularly liked figure, in the metal scene.
No.
And I think how people feel about her has kind of coloured or create this indifference to what Ozzy does, so I'm listening to these albums thinking he's still got some creativity in there. He's still doing interesting stuff. He's still got an ear for a melody. He sounds great. Some of those songs just soar. And I just thought, you know what? Fucking love Ozzy. And I just think it's time we made Ozzy great again and just talked about everything he's done and kind of, I don't know, maybe just reconnected or reminded ourselves that he's not a spent force. I think he tends to get written off now as like, oh, he should retire, he should give up, he's had his day. And I've reached the point now, I'm like, no, fuck that. Let him carry on, mate. Let's have more. Let's have more and just enjoy what he's done.
I've been guilty of that. When the whole thing came out that Ozzy was going to stop playing live and all that, and I have said, I think I've said it on this podcast. I think I've probably said it on social media that it is probably the right time for Ozzy to just step down. I blame Sharon Osbourne and all that, but I think deep down it looks like he doesn't want to stop, does he? He wants to carry on. This isn't anything to do with Sharon. He wants to carry on. It's in his blood, and he doesn't know any different.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just got it's like Lemmy, isn't it? It's like he'll just keep going until he can't. And it's great you said that because he wrote a song about it called "I Don't Want to Stop."
Yeah.
It says it all, really. But even you listen back to songs like Road to Nowhere, it's about being on tour. Songs like Mama, I'm Coming Home, it's about coming back from tour.
Yeah.
It really is what he knows and what he loves. And just like you've said there, I think it's genuine, I don't think it's, people say, oh, it's just Sharon kind of, pushing him out the door, keeping him on tour, keeping that cash cow going. And look, I'm not going to say there isn't an element of that probably somewhere in there, but I do think there's a genuine desire, I do think he just wants to carry on and carry on. And I think the fact he can't because of all the kind of health issues he's had recently really has affected him, Or like listen, Ordinary Man is a really dark album in terms of someone coming to terms with their mortality and in the sort of twilight years of their life, especially experiencing all that poor health. It's it's actually worth a listen just for that. It's him singing about the end of days.
It's got to be similar to when like professional sportsmen finally admit that they've got to retire and give up, and then there's a void in their life, then, isn't there? So what else do you do? And Ozzy's not the type to go on fucking TV, and obviously you've had the Osbournes, but he's not going to do anything else, is he?
Nah.
The fear is that if he's not doing what he loves doing, he'll end up just kind of sort of wasting away almost. It's just, you see pictures of him now, and he just seems to look 10 years older every week.
Yeah.
So it's almost like he just needs to be kept going, so we can keep him going for that little bit longer.
Yeah, I guess it's like anything. It's like, it might be a bit of a weird analogy, or maybe not a weird analogy, really, given the sort of involvement Ozzy's had with all sorts of animals, bats and doves and things like that. But
Cats, the cats.
Yeah, it's like when you see a zoo animal just caged up, can't run around, can't do what it does, and it just kind of looks haggard and miserable and unhappy. So I think maybe that's what we're seeing with that kind of sudden aging. But yeah, I mean, it's not just about now. I just kind of thought, let's sort of raise a glass and just talk about Ozzy through the years. And like when I got into Ozzy, it was like the one of those guys that unified metal fans.
Yeah,
It's pretty much one of those, one of those artists that whether you were into the really, really heavy stuff, or the more commercial stuff, everybody loved Ozzy. He was just kind of the glue that held the metal scene together. And that's what I want to remember.
Yeah, I agree. And I think obviously we weren't around then, but coming out of Black Sabbath, no one knew what was going to happen to Ozzy Osbourne then, did they? And for him to come out with, obviously Blizzard of Oz first, which is good, but it's still Ozzy in a bit of a shit state coming out of Sabbath. But then Diary of a Madman hits, and yeah, you're right. That album's is almost as faultless as a piece of work as he's ever done. So it hit then, didn't it? And throughout the 80s and into the 90s, just so many great songs. Like, not even just metal songs, just great songs. Whether you consider it hard rock or pop music or whatever it was, even the sort of cross-dressing trucker phase of the Ultimate Sin, and
I always call it
making it to top of the pops. It's just, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
yeah.
I call it the Pat Butcher years. Yeah, there's some live footage out there that's just fucking hilarious. With his big kind of glittery jackets and I think that's a crucial thing as well. Like, because as I said, at the top of the episode, I think he gets written off as a bit of a clown nowadays, but he's always been a bit naff. And like throughout his career, and I think that's great. Like, I mean that, I mean it in a really endearing way. He's always kind of been this, yeah, I'll give it a go. Okay, you've got like, that era, Poison and Motley Crue came out, the glam scene was growing. So Ozzy dives in there, puts a bit of bleach in his hair, wears a sequin jacket, and it looks like you imagine those stories that are told where he used to Sharon would steal his clothes so that he couldn't go out drinking, so he just used to put on one of her dresses and just go off down to the pub. It's like he's just taken that onto the stage.
I mean, take it all the way back to the start. I mean, well over a year ago, I think it was longer than that, we did an episode sort of like that whole working class roots of heavy metal kind of thing, and Ozzy Osbourne is the ultimate kind of working class hero when it comes to heavy metal. You think about Sabbath as a whole and their background, where they're from, that the industrial Birmingham, all of that. Ozzy Osbourne worked in a slaughterhouse. He was a thief. He was all those sort of late 50s and into the 60s kind of cliche growing up in the Midlands, poor, it didn't really matter. And then to end up where he is, he's never lost those working class roots. He will always be the working class Brummie. Even the way he sings, he's always had that kind of American twang about the way he delivers his voice. But that thick Birmingham accent is always there. Stop singing and out it comes. Never
Look,
lost it.
I'll tell you what, I mean, we've got to talk about that. You say going back to the start, and you're absolutely right. I agree with all of that. But, you've just brought up the voice, and you have to acknowledge nobody sounds like Ozzy Osbourne. Nobody.
No.
There, I can't think of a single example of someone that kind of has a voice that's similar to Ozzy, or it's completely unique. And I wonder if that's one of the reasons he is who he is. Nobody sounds like Ozzy Osbourne.
No, he's never been, what you would call a technically gifted vocalist, but it's an iconic voice, and yeah, you're right, it is completely unique. You would instantly know Ozzy's voice when he sings. It doesn't matter what he'd be singing, you would know it.
Yeah, and it's just got that amazing kind of haunting, mournful quality. And just to tie up what you said there about the kind of working class roots, and just to tie that into his voice as well. Like, I've always thought there's that kind of striving quality in his voice. He can't quite hit the notes.
Yeah.
So as you're listening, you're kind of rooting for him to kind of get there, and he'll just about make it. You can hear him sort of pushing himself up to those higher notes, stretching to take his voice to those places. And I think there's something in that we can all relate to. That's why we can all connect to it. It's about being, it's that kind of lying in the gutter, staring at the stars thing. We're all, we all have a dream, and he shot for the stars and he made it. And I think that's evident in all of his music and the way he sings and the way he approaches everything. I think that's a big part of his appeal. He's the one that got lucky and lived the dream.
And he's always been out there on his own as well, isn't he? No matter what he's done in his career, there's never been any backing vocals or anything like that. There's never been any sort of, anybody in his bands that's joined him with vocals. It's always just been Ozzy. Obviously now it's Ozzy and a little bit of auto-tune thrown in the mix, but
listen, who isn't guilty of that?
Yeah, exactly. We'll allow that. But it is that he's just always just ploughed on, and I don't think I've ever given him the credit for that. We've all been guilty. When the Osbournes came out, we all found it hilarious. It was great. For us as metal fans, it was seeing Ozzy Osbourne on TV, and it was this bumbling fool, and it was really entertaining. But it did quite quickly become a bit embarrassing to watch, which was a shame, really.
Well, I'll tell you, yeah, here's something. I've not actually seen it. Yeah, I've seen a few episodes, but very, very quickly I was like, this isn't this isn't my Ozzy. It's like, I kind of don't want to look through that window into that world, But you talk about him live. So my first kind of Ozzy purchase was the Live and Loud concert on VHS. I was in that. So there used to be a record shop in Croydon called Beano's, which is a fantastic record shop. I think you've mentioned it on here before, actually.
We will have done, yeah.
But I used to go down there and I'd buy. You'll love this. I was buying tapes at the time. I know.
Yeah. Always a hipster.
No, this was just because that's all I had was a cassette. Anyway, and I can remember being in Beano's and hearing Iron Man on the the shop sound system, and it sounded like the heaviest thing I'd ever heard in my life. It was the first time. I mean, there was a lot of firsts that day. First time I'd heard Sabbath. Played, I think I'd heard Paranoid and stuff like that, which was always quite poppy to my ears. But hearing Iron Man and that riff, it came over the shop tannoy, and I was just like, what the fuck is that? That's incredible. I'd never heard anything with that much weight to it. So I was diving around looking for some Black Sabbath, and it just so happened and they just didn't have any in stock. It's a secondhand record shop, so you're kind of going with whatever's in stock at the time. But they did have a copy of Live and Loud on VHS. So I took that home, and it was one of those, I watched it every night, like several times on repeat, on repeat, on repeat. And the performance, just as you said, it's just kind of Ozzy and a bucket, right? Ozzy and his bucket of water. And then you go back to that kind of what's unique about him. No one else could entertain a fucking crowd of, I don't know, 20,000 people running around, shuffling about, sticking his head in a bucket of water and then just chucking buckets of water over the crowd. And that's it. Yeah. And of course, singing all these great songs. But it's just another thing that's completely unique. He found a way of entertaining people that no one else does. And it's ridiculous. Ozzy in a fucking bucket of water.
It is ridiculous when you think of Sabbath music. Do you know what I mean? It's how gloomy, how dark it always was. And I know his solo stuff is a little bit more upbeat, but the fact he can perform songs like War Pigs and Iron Man and stuff like that, and still run around like a lunatic, let's go crazy, throwing buckets of water on people. He's just a refreshing character.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Let's forget about Sabbath for a minute and dig around in his solo career. What are your favorite albums? Because you're quite the lover of this later stuff, and we've sort of briefly touched on it before, but for me, I think he hit a peak around No More Tears. Certainly, songwriting wise, I think it's a classy album. I think that one it's very well written, very well produced.
Yeah,
really strong songs. Certainly side A of the album, the first 4 songs: Tinker Man, Don't Want to Change the World, Man, I'm Coming Home, Desire.
Now you got to give credit to our man Lemmy Kilminster. I think 5 of those tracks are co-written by Lemmy.
Yeah, so it's almost like everything great in the world comes together, and that's what you get. But you two, what's your favorite albums?
Favorite, I have to go to Diary of a Madman. To me, that's where it all came together. So you had the kind of rock and roll of Blizzard of Oz, which is straight down the line rock and roll album. But on Diary, he really brought in that kind of like that occult. I mean, the title track says it all. That's where the kind of Ozzy as the madman came in. The theatrical elements to it. The songwriting just became more epic. Again, that title track for me is just peak Ozzy. It's incredible. What else did you have? Over the Mountain, Flying High Again.
I think I'm pretty sure Over the Mountain was the first Ozzy song I ever heard. I'm sure of it. And that's so, yeah, I agree with that. It's a fucking great song. Great song.
Funny enough, I listened to Diary of a Madman before this session because it's an album I've always liked it and always thought it's good, but I've never been able to get into it as a great album, and I still can't, and I don't know why that is. I think side A is great, side B less so for me, and actually the title track I just can't enthuse about it, and I don't know what it is about it. It's frustrating because it's always spoken so highly. So yeah, I don't know.
An interesting one.
It's just, I don't know. Maybe what you've been saying about when Ozzy does like the pop, as it were. Because he's always said he's a rock and roll artist. He's not a metal artist. He's a rock and roll. It's just when he did his thing in the 80s, heavy metal was the rock and roll du jour, wasn't it? So that was the thing. And I think when he does the fun, anthemic, big, catchy, that's when he's at his best. So maybe for me, that's why maybe the title track of Diary of a Madman doesn't quite work so much, because he's pushing boundaries. So if you're into that kind of thing, great. But it doesn't work for me so much. But it's interesting because, like I say, my favourite is Blizzard, because I think it's just brilliant. I think the production is a bit lacking. I think if it was better, it would be one of my favourites of all time. But otherwise, it's a great Ozzy album. Certainly, number 2 is No More Tears. I think that, that side A is as great as any great album. Quite frankly, as you said, songwriting is great. Yeah. Production, it's just such a feel good album a lot of the time. Although I do have to I have a bit of concern with consistency, because he starts off that album saying, "Would you like some sweeties, little girl? Come a little closer."
I was going to bring that one up.
And then later on, he says, "Your mama told you not to talk to strangers." So it's like, what are you going, Ozzy?
I think, and I might be, I'd have to check this, but so I'll say it anyway. There's a few, like Ozzy would occasionally play characters. I think that's about someone. Mr. Tinker Train, as in, I think it's based on a news story. Which he did do from time to time. For example, something like what's the track? Jimmy Swaggers, he talks about Miracle Man. So that's about a news story where a American preacher was kind of in a hotel room with like hookers and all sorts.
Legend.
So he'd bring that into the song and kind of almost sing it like he's playing that role, like he's playing that character. But yeah, I admit it's a difficult line to kind of to listen to comfortably. Would you like some sweeties, little girl?
Yeah, but it works. It fucking works. Like I say, that album, it's just got that fun to it, the whole thing, isn't it? Not that I'm saying giving sweeties to little girls is fun, but
I think
it's fair acting.
I also think Zakk Wylde hit a stride on that album as well.
Yes.
He really, really came into Zakk as kind of, we know him now. He
it's a very Zakk Wylde sounding album, isn't it?
It all came together. Ozzy, their first album together, Ozzy was still, well, he was at his worst at that point in time when he did that No Prayer, No Rest for the Wicked album. And obviously Zakk was quite young, and obviously after that, Ozzy mostly sobered up, and Zakk, as you say, he found his feet, and it all coalesced. And we got a great album. But I do want to shout out to Bark at the Moon, because I think that's my third album. A lot of people love the title track and enjoy that album, but it's always been derided for me, because people always talk about those first two albums of No More Tears, and Bark at the Moon is almost like the sort of it's fun, but it's not serious. But again, that's what Ozzy does, as you said. It's that fun, it's that rock and roll, it's that pop, but that catchiness. I mean, we love the title track, but I also love stuff like Now You See Him, Now You Don't.
Yeah.
It's just with that way those synthesizers underpin it later on. And yeah, it's an album that I think deserves a lot more love.
When I was making, I used to make compilation tapes for the car, pass them around, and side two, just as I think it is like the first song on side B is Center of Eternity. Was always a great one just to kind of kick off the second half of a compilation tape. Yeah, a lot of love for Bark at the Moon, and that fucking front cover. I mean, how? In fact, the screen on my phone, like the hold screen, is an outtake from that shot, that photo shoot of Ozzy dressed as a fucking werewolf. I mean, I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall in that meeting where they're like, right, we got an idea for the album. Okay, Bark at the Moon, we're going to dress you up.
I'd like to just been a fly on the wall when they were doing the fucking photo shoot, because he wouldn't have been sober. There's no doubt about that. Fuck knows what must have been absolute carnage, I reckon.
Yeah, it probably has no memory of it at all. But I just think it is it's a beautiful album cover just because it's so bloody ridiculous. And I love, it's like the classic Ozzy logo as well. The logo on Bark at the Moon, that kind of orange and yellow with a spiky typeface.
Yeah.
To me, that's the quintessential Ozzy logo as I kind of, it's my favorite, as I love it.
Thing is, though, we've all picked albums that are No More Tears and backwards, which, like you said at the start of the episode, is what people will consider the classic era of Ozzy Osbourne. But what about the later ones? And so beyond No More Tears, because I know you were saying about Patient Number 9 and Ordinary Man. There's been a couple of wobbly moments in there, but I'd gone over Osmosis this week, and it's probably the first time I've listened to it in a good decade. Actually listened to it properly, and I've completely forgotten what a fucking great album that is as well. And it's got a similar kind of sound to No More Tears. It kind of follows on perfectly from it. But there's some great fucking songs on that. Absolutely great songs. It was really nice to listen to it again and almost be surprised. Shit, I forgot about that song. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Doesn't happen very often.
I think of Osmosis for me is Ozzy's last truly great vocal performance. I think it's just before, I think he probably needed a little bit more enhancement than he did, as in sonic enhancement. Yeah.
He doesn't need the other kind.
Yeah, exactly. Now, by complete coincidence, I was listening to a podcast like moments before I logged on here, and it was an interview with Michael Beinhorn, who produced Osmosis, and he briefly talked about making that album. Said some interesting things. Firstly, that Ozzy hated being in the studio, and Ozzy's kind of disowned Osmosis. Doesn't play any of it live. Talks about it really negatively. And I think it's that he had such a bad experience in the studio. Michael Beinhorn is a taskmaster. I think he's famous for that. But he mentioned Ozzy's method of recording was just to literally record line by line, again vocal line. Yeah, you have to clarify these things when you're talking about Ozzy. He'd record one line at a time. He'd record one line, he'd double it, then he'd go back and record the second line, then he'd double it, and if he missed the double on a maybe the second or third pass, he'd then go back and re-record the first version of that line that he happened to be doing. Like, it just sounds like it's meticulous. And he says Ozzy won't do a complete take, and I think it's no surprise. It wouldn't be a surprise to anyone that he probably couldn't, to hold a performance in one go. I don't think that consistency is there, which is fair enough. We kind of know that about him, but it's interesting to me that he recorded so meticulously. And I would say, I mean, I'm repeating myself now, but I think it's the last great Ozzy performance in terms of his voice. There's something that's still quite real there.
Yeah, because after that it was Down to Earth, wasn't it? Which it was. Yeah, that I remember buying it. We were students at the time. I remember buying that on CD, and it was just like it didn't really do a great deal for me back then, I must admit.
No, I think I mean, this is kind of around the time of the Osbournes.
Yeah.
And a lot of other stuff going on as well. I think you had the Osbournes, you had the like Ozfest and stuff like that. And there was a bit of a like new metal was stretching its wings and kind of having a bit of influence. And I feel like Down to Earth and Black Rain were kind of, I think, Ozzy taking too much influence from what was going on outside of what he does, and just trying to write in a I mean, I suppose it's fair to say he always wrote in quite a commercial way, but it didn't gel as well as it had done previously. And I think then they're not without their highlights. I think Facing Hell on Down to Earth is a track I've always liked. Black Rain had I Don't Want to Stop on it. They had their moments, but yeah, both of those albums for me were I tell you what, I found myself thinking actually a lot around that era was, I just want Ozzy to make another rock and roll record.
Yeah.
And I think that's why I've kind of responded so well to the last couple and the stuff he's done with Andrew Watt, is because he's gone back to doing rock and roll. There's a looser vibe on both those records. Shout out to Rhythm Section to Die For. You got Duff McKagan on bass, right? So that's kind of a hard-hitting punk rock bass player on there. And you got Chad Smith on drums. Chad Smith and Taylor Hawkins on the new album.
Yeah.
So you've got a really fucking great rhythm section playing in a really exuberant way. It's rock and roll, which is what Ozzy does best.
Yeah, 100%. You mentioned Ozfest there. We have to touch on that. Really, was it a positive thing for Ozzy Osbourne, Ozfest, because it started in the States in, was it 96 or 97 were the first ones?
96 was
Yeah.
the solo one was 96, and then
That's right, yeah.
But
it all reached the UK in 98, didn't it? Was the first one. And
Milton Keynes, I was there.
You was there. Do you think it was a positive thing? That it was this big touring festival that was all circulated around Ozzy and Sabbath?
I do think so, because that is what Ozzy does. He performs, he entertains, he does his music, and he had the opportunity to do that. And in fact, I think that Ozfest period, sort of 96 to 2001, before the Osbournes, opened those other doors, I think that was quite a positive period for him. Even if we might not sort of say great things about Down to Earth, he was able to do what he does at his best and bring out all those bands and artists. How many bands got their break and got their, have their career made by going on that tour?
That's true. That's true.
I saw him in I saw him in '98, obviously at the Milton Keynes Bowl on that first Ozfest. He was great. I'd never seen him before. Great fun. Didn't know any songs, but loved it. Obviously, he played with Black Sabbath in 2001, the Ozfest in Milton Keynes Bowl again. The last one they did in 2002. Again, it's all starting to bit dodgy at that point. But that was a final one. That was a final Ozfest. It was back at Donington as a sort of rock festival, but it was a bit of a sort of test for Download, wasn't it? The following year.
It was a bit. It wasn't the greatest event.
Download was great that first year, but that final Ozfest was. I mean, the weather sucked. The
weather was fucking horrendous.
It was, the whole thing's back to the sort of we're throwing it all together as a last thing. And I actually remember Ozzy saying, I can't bear seeing you all miserable and wet, and it breaks my heart. And it's just like, but that was it. 2002 was when the Osbournes started. It all changed, I think. So I think those 5 years before were a positive period for him. I really do. That was his, next great age.
It's almost like it gave the world a chance to worship Ozzy Osbourne again, because I know you had Sabbath as well, but it was Ozfest. It was Ozzy. I know Sharon was largely the brains behind the whole thing, and credit to her for that, is what it became. But Lollapalooza was coming to an end in the States, wasn't it? That was all starting to sort of, die off a bit. So it picked up, and it took new metal to the fucking stratosphere, unfortunately, but it is what it is. But it did. It gave these people all over the States and all over, in the UK and all that, just a chance to fucking worship Sabbath and Ozzy again.
Yeah, it did. Also, there on the downside, it did give us an Ozzy Osbourne collaboration with Coal Chamber on the
dear God, that
Peter Gabriel cover, "Shock the Monkey," wasn't it?
Oh, that poor fucking monkey. Dreadful. Anything that involved Coal Chamber, just no. But you know what? At the time, you kind of it made sense. And Coal Chamber were coming up, and they're on the Ozfest. They were a proper fucking flavor of the month. Ozzy got involved, and why not? It was just,
yeah.
What can you say?
Well, before I forget, chaps, because it's driving me a little bit nuts. Around 97 or 98, when Ozfest has started touring, and I went about a year or so into my metal birth, as it were, properly. There was actually a documentary on, I think, Channel 5 about Ozzy and the Ozfest. So this was about four years or so before the Osbournes. So the kids were in it, and they were younger and normal kids, basically. Amy was in it as well, talking about her dad, etc., and whatnot. So she was there, and this was just a standalone documentary on Channel 5, and it showed Ozzy being Ozzy. I just want to be performing. It's a madhouse here, that kind of thing. So there's a little taster there. But there's a lot of good stuff about Ozfest and showing the bands and showing the crowds. And again, it's one of those things that made me feel, you know what? I love metal, and I love being a metalhead now. It's great. This is what it's all about. And I cannot find any mention of it on the internet whatsoever, not on YouTube, not on IMDb. It's as if it's been wiped from history. And I just want to watch that again.
How bizarre.
Just looking now, when you search for it, all you get is there was Penelope Spheris did a documentary in '99.
Oh God, no! This was just Channel 5 kind of.
That's what I mean. That's the only one
Yeah.
that comes up is Penelope Spheeris's one. So yeah, you're right. There's nothing. I don't remember that, to be fair.
Yeah,
I
Not
didn't
that
see
at
it.
all.
yeah. I'd love to. If anyone knows, if anyone can remember it on here, let us know because. I mean, it's quite possible I've still got a video somewhere with it on. And I'd find out.
Someone listening to this is going to know.
Yeah.
Someone of
But yeah.
a vintage, I'm sure. But
But that was, for me at that point in time, that episode was great because again, it just opened myself up to Ozzy again, and who he was and his history and his influence, and yeah, it just highlighted how great all this stuff was, and yeah, it came along at the right moment.
Mm. Yeah, and I think, and then after that, kind of ushered in the new era of Black Sabbath.
yeah,
And which I think it's, it dawned on me. I think Ozzy, here's me talking about the value of Ozzy's kind of later albums or the later stuff. Arguably, that began with 13, which I think was a great vocal performance from Ozzy on that album.
it's a funny album, 13. I wasn't all that sort of fussed about it when it first came out, and it's one of those ones that I've gone back over and had another listen to it, and in recent years, and yeah, it is a good album. It's that, and obviously going away from Ozzy is the Heaven and Hell album that
Oh yeah,
with Dio. Both of those albums stand up in their own right as a quality Black Sabbath album. So
absolutely.
that says it all, really, where they were.
Yeah, and such a shame that the Heaven and Hell, which to all intents and purposes is a Black Sabbath album.
Yeah.
It's criminal that they weren't able to use that name. It was a funny period because you've just reminded me, you had all that stuff going on as well, where Ozzy's done the Ozfest. He's gone out, he's done some shows with Black Sabbath. Then for whatever reason, they've gone out with Dio and done Heaven and Hell, but they're not allowed to call it Sabbath because in the background there's all this kind of strange legal stuff going on, which I think is another black mark against, gets sort of attributed to a black mark against Sharon's name, and that whole, she sort of represents the whole the shady business side of it.
Yeah.
I mean, she's the daughter of Don Arden, like he was a fucking gangster. So, I mean, what
basically,
the fuck? Yeah.
It's in her blood, isn't it?
What do you expect? Yeah.
But I just want to quickly talk about that whole Heaven and Hell thing because I was lucky enough to get to see them in Plymouth of all places, at Plymouth Pavilions, and it was with Iced Earth and Lamb of God. It was a fucking great lineup, to be fair.
Right.
And it was, I never thought, I was at that point, I wasn't all that aware of the Dio era Black Sabbath because it wasn't the thing, especially as Sabbath were back and Ozzy was, very much in the forefront. You weren't really thinking about it, but that was a fucking great gig. That was absolutely fucking belter of a gig. And I got just as many fond memories as that as the first time I saw Black Sabbath at the NEC and the Last Supper shows.
Yeah.
Which we talk about influence. System of a Down supported that night.
Wow.
And they had just done Snowblind for the Nativity in Black 2.
Oh, wow. That's a great compilation. That the first Nativity in Black.
Both of them are. They're both great. But they played Snowblind that night at request of Ozzy Osbourne. They were like, we don't want to play it, but Ozzy specifically asked us if we can play it. So we're going to give it a go. And if you hate it, please let us know. But you know what? They absolutely nailed it, to be fair. And the place loved it. So, it's just,
man.
Yeah, it's Ozzy all over it.
Back in the day. But it's, you're mentioning the Dio era of Sabbath. And I know we're kind of deviating off slightly, but yeah, for years, probably at least a decade, I was like an Aussie purist when it came to Black Sabbath.
I think we've all been through that,
Yeah. It took me a long time to even acknowledge, firstly the Dio stuff, which was the first thing, and then on into all the other kind of variations of Black Sabbath there been. Now as I sit here now, it's like all Sabbath matters. I just love it all.
Get that on a t-shirt.
Yeah. But I was for a really long time, it's like no Ozzy, no Sabbath, which it's kind of where I was at the time. But I think that says a lot about how synonymous with that sound his voice this was, he really
Yeah.
did.
Yeah.
It's interesting actually when you hear Dio, who's got, the greatest voice in heavy metal, but when you listen to him sing the old Black Sabbath stuff like Paranoid and War Pigs, it sounds wrong.
Yeah. It's
I
yeah.
can't quite get my head around it.
It's because it needs that slightly,
It needs the grit.
dare I say, amateur kind of approach to it.
Yeah.
You know, we think we know we talked about what Black Sabbath are and where they come from, and it needs that down to earth, slightly pub kind of drunk, giving it your all, and that's what Ozzy did. You know, we're not going to say he was a crap singer, but he had that vibe about him. Whereas Dio is a professional singer.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It
and he's
doesn't-
got all the flamboyance that comes with it, and the melody in Paranoid, for example, it's not a flamboyant melody, it's this kind of clipped little vocal that just sort of barks out at you. It's fucking great. Do you know, it came on the radio today. I was just working from home and it came on the radio, and grinning from ear to ear, just listening to that. It's a great little song. But anyone else tries to sing it, it doesn't quite work.
Yeah,
Doesn't
it's not right. But you know what? Every time I go to Villa Parks for football, before the players come out, it's always played over the tunnel. It's either Crazy Train or Paranoid. And no matter how many times you will hear Paranoid in your life, which is a lot because it's all over the place.
Yeah.
And admittedly, when I was younger, it's probably, oh, it's fucking Paranoid again. It's always the same fucking thing. There's other Black Sabbath songs, all that usual shit that metal fans do. Every time I hear it at Villa Park, it just puts a massive smile on my face.
Oh, good.
Yeah,
and that's
we don't hear any metal at Selhurst Park, unfortunately.
you don't smile very often either.
But then, so segueing that, so you think about Paranoid, and you mentioned Crazy Train as well, and it just reminded me of that riff. Okay, so the Crazy Train riff, what a fucking great riff that is. So you can't talk about riffs without talking about all the guitar players that Ozzy has kind of involved himself with over the years, and there's some, I mean, Randy Rhoads, what a fucking legend, what an amazing guitar player.
Yeah.
This is why I say that period of LA hair metal, the early 80s, needs more respect, because that spawned Randy Rhoads, it spawned Jake Lee,
Yep.
Yeah, and the whole way that Ozzy and Randy Rhoads kind of almost met by chance. It's mad how that even came apart. It came to be, and I don't think Ozzy wouldn't have been Ozzy without Randy Rhoads, because
I think it was crucial
it was
to
pure chemistry, wasn't it?
I think there are two. I mean, there's a lot of stories you could tell about that era, in terms of kind of who saved Ozzy, because I think we talk about Randy Rhoads. You mentioned kind of how did they find each other? Seemingly these two completely different personalities. You've got Ozzy, who's really chaotic. You've got this uber professional, super talented, like young uprising star, takes music very seriously. You wouldn't necessarily put them together, but it worked. But
There's a bit of a yin and yang almost, I think.
Yeah. But then the other crucial ingredient that not a lot of people talk about, unless you're Sharon Osbourne in court, is Bob Daisley, the songwriter. So a lot of all these songs that we talk about the first album, the songwriter was Bob Daisley, and the guys in the band were writing a lot of that material. And then obviously famously he sued Ozzy or Sharon, or the Osbournes, I suppose, for songwriting royalties. And in what admittedly I think is a really dick move, Sharon then re-recorded the first two albums with a different rhythm section. So Mike Bordin and Rob Trujillo from Metallica re-recorded the rhythm tracks. So for a while, the only versions you could buy didn't feature the rhythm section on the original albums.
Yeah, that's the kind of thing that gives her such a fucking bad rep. Do you know what I mean?
It's pure spite. It's like, okay.
It is. I mean, we've got to give her a certain amount of credit, because without Sharon Osbourne, Ozzy wouldn't still be alive. Do you know what I mean? There were times that she kept him alive, but it started to feel like that once she started to become more and more in the limelight, and we don't want to dwell on her for too long because it will just go down a whole different rabbit hole. She became too much in the public eye, and that's what started to take it away from Ozzy. And this is, I know this isn't the case, but it almost felt like she was getting revenge for all the shit that he put her through all those years ago.
Yeah.
You know, and that is cynical, but that's how it felt. It felt like she's like, right, you've done all sorts to me. You tried to kill me, all of this. I'm going to have my 5 minutes of fame, and I don't care what happens to you. I might be wrong. I probably am, but that's how it felt.
Yeah. Now, interesting, there's a film in production, the kind of like Ozzy and Sharon story, which it could go one way or the other. But I mean, you touched on it there when you talked about Ozzy trying to murder Sharon. You know, there is this kind of mad history. And we mentioned earlier in the episode as well about Ozzy stealing Sharon's clothes just so he could go out to the pub.
Yeah.
You know, when he's the height of his alcoholism. You know, there's this. I mean, that's the other thing when you talk about Ozzy, all the crazy fucking stories. These, you know, snorting a line of ants, pissing on the Alamo, biting the head off a bat, biting the head off a dove. Who else? Who else in heavy metal has a similar, you know, can you tell this many stories about, has all these anecdotes?
Don't forget the TV that went out the hotel room window and landed about 6 inches from somebody downstairs just minding their own business, having a fag. The fucking TV just landed on the ground next to him.
My favorite is, or one of my favorites, I should say, is like Davy Grudge tells this one where he took on, I think it was the Diary of a Madman tour, as part of the stage act. He had this little person that would kind of dress up as a like some sort of druid and move about on the stage. You know, this guy is only about 3 feet tall, and at an airport or somewhere out and about, they're having a wrestle, and Ozzy's basically just dragging this guy around, and somebody intervenes and says, "You can't do that! Like, what are you doing there? Leave him alone!" And Ozzy looks at him and says, "He's my midget, and I'll do what I like with him." And then the little guy, I forget his name, looked at this guy that intervened as well, and he said, "Yeah, I'm his midget, and he can do what he likes with me."
Unfortunately, there were dark times around then as well. I mean, there's the whole thing of shooting his cats, and you know, when the band are writing his songs, he's got a songwriter. Probably at that point, he probably couldn't even write his own fucking name. And it's incredible that he managed to carve out a solo career when you think about it. You think, well, what a fucking state he was in. I don't know how much of it he remembers, if anything at all, but it's incredible, really. I mean, you've got your Mick and Keith, and you've got Steven Tyler and Joe Perry, and all those people that probably should be dead or in prison, certainly in Steven Tyler's case. But Ozzy was just almost on a mission to self-destruct.
Yeah.
I mean, he benefited from, well, let's just say, being a big name at that time, and heavy metal being, you know, the most popular youthful music form in the world. If it had less popularity, I don't think it would have been the same, quite frankly. I think it would have, you know, the record label would have said, nah.
Also, I think, and I was saying this just before we started recording, you know, I think he's a really endearing man. And I think a lot of people feel very close to him. And I think there's the benefit there of people wanting to help and stepping in and kind of rallying around and lifting him up and kind of recognizing that raw talent, because that's really what he has. It's this kind of raw talent, and just giving him what he needs to elevate that. So, you know, you've got really, really good musicians coming in and writing for him, because you know what, they want to write for Ozzy Osbourne because they want they want to, you know, they
why wouldn't you?
I was about to say they want to be a part of it, but I don't mean that in a cynical way. I just mean, you know what, they want to align themselves with him, they want to be involved, they want to hang around him, they want to be a part of this whole, you know, this almost like family. You know, when musicians that work with Ozzy talk about him, they talk about him like they're part of his family, and there's this warmth and this endearment and this really good feeling that comes from people when they start talking about Ozzy.
Yeah, and I think you can say the same thing about his relationship with Sharon. For everything that all went on, they clearly and you think how long they've been together, how long they've been married, they absolutely fucking adore each other. You can see it now. And when he's with his kids and the grandkids and all that kind of thing, it all just, like you say, it's very harmonious, and it looks like he's happy. And
Yeah.
that's quite a big thing, I think, with everything that someone's gone through, both him and Sharon gone through in their life. They've got to a point where they're just happy, and he's a granddad, and it's, do you know what I mean? It's great to see that he's lived on and lived to a point where he can appreciate all of that. Because I expect if you said to him in 1981, 1982, in 40 years' time, you're going to be a grandparent, he'd have laughed in your face and gone and done a few lines. So,
yeah,
it's great to see.
Yeah. I think he's, I mean, but what a journey to get there.
Just a bit.
I mean, what a journey. Actually, there's a really good, now, which is it, just going back to Ordinary Man, so one of the more recent albums, there's a video for the Under the Graveyard, right, as a track of that album. It's one of the greatest Aussie singles in recent years. It's really, really good, but it's also got a very cool video which kind of tells the story of that mad era, just getting involved with Sharon and what was going on at that time. And they got an actor kind of, or two actors playing the roles of like Ozzy and Sharon in it. But it's well worth a Google on YouTube.
I don't think I've seen that.
It's a really good track, and it's a really good video. Like it's quite a like cinematic video, which you don't see too much of these days. I think ever since the pandemic, everyone's sort of done everything on an iPhone. And as I say that, I'm thinking about the newest Judas Priest video, which looks like they filmed it in Rob Halford's back garden. There's a lot of that about at the moment. But Under the Graveyard, check that out. Check out the video. Very cool.
Yeah, I've not seen that. I got to admit, I'll as soon as we get off this, I'm going to go and check that out. Just some other few things that keep popping into my head. You go back to talk about Penelope Spheris earlier on. You go back to the Decline and Fall of Western Civilization. All the stuff when he's in the kitchen just trying to make breakfast, and it's like he's talking away, and it's almost everything he's doing is almost in the background, but you can't help but watch him try and do everything. And he's just like, my God, what kind of fucking state is this man in? But he just carries on. He, professional to a point. He carries on with the interview, he carries on talking, giving all the stories, but all around him it's just complete carnage.
Yeah, I think that probably sums it up perfectly. Like all around him is carnage, but he shines, like, in the middle of all of this. He gets through it and he shines.
What do you think's next? We've got to that point now. What do you think he's going to do now? Are we going to get another album out of him? Do you think he'll ever play live again?
I think we'll get another album. I mean, I mentioned it last week, but that he's talking about that. He's in the list of sort of pending releases for this year. So whether or not we see anything from him this year, but I wonder if that's been his kind of saving. That's what's sort of saved his sanity. Of what is left of Ozzy Osbourne's sanity is being able to make music. And I think in Andrew Watt, he's met someone, probably the first producer in a long time, that really knows how to work with him and get the best out of him. And I do think he is getting the best out of him. But he's talked about wanting to do something else, and they work really quickly. I mean, Ordinary Man and Patient Number 9, I mean, both came out within a year of each other.
Yeah,
I think
not far off that. Yeah.
So I wouldn't be surprised. Some great musicians involved in those last albums. So I think Andrew Watt has he kind of knows how to get the best out of people. I mean, Zakk Wylde was back. We mentioned guitar players. The last album had Zakk Wylde, Mike McCready from Pearl Jam was on there, Eric Clapton was on there, Jeff Beck was on there, and Tony Iommi was on there. So
it's not a bad lineup, is it?
I mean, that's on top of that rhythm section. That's some fucking heavy hitters going on. So
then when you're Ozzy Osbourne, you can get who the fuck you want to play on your album. Who's going to turn it down?
That's true. Elton John even popped up on Ordinary Man. Fucking hell. Yeah.
But that's the company he's in. He is that legend. Why shouldn't he be?
Well, this is the thing. So I get
as Elton John.
The point I'm making is that's it. He can pull all these people in. They're all happy, willing to work with him. I think we'll see some more music. And be interesting to see like who's next. I mean, how do you top getting Jeff Beck on your album? I don't know, but let's wait and see.
I think a
Um,
lot of it is because, like you say, he's just such a lovable human being. It's not just the fact he's a legend; he is a lovable human being. So who's not going to want to work with him?
he is, and but he's flawed as well. But I think because it's funny because when you say he's a lovable human being, there's a voice at the back of my head that says, "Yeah, but he's been a fucking shit to a lot of people." He
Oh,
tried to
well, yeah,
murder his
massively,
wife. You
massively.
know, but I think there's something about the fact that he owns that.
Yeah,
And I think he has. He lives a life with some genuine regrets and some genuine reflections on that. And it does all go into the music.
yeah,
And when you listen, see, this is the thing. I think a lot of people will make a judgment about Ozzy Osbourne and what he's doing now based on what they think and feel about it, him, I should say, without ever really listening.
yeah,
And if you spend some time with his music, even the latter day stuff, all of that stuff I've just said is in there. It's in the lyrics, it's in the music. He still has that yearning quality in his voice. Um, there's value there. There really is value there. So, I'm still on board.
on board the good ship Ozzy Osbourne. It's why would we ever get off?
The crazy train, surely.
Oh, yeah,
Of course.
I didn't miss that one. Boom.
Of course.
Look, I mean, I think we've contributed to making Aussie great again, haven't we? I think we've
Yeah,
you know,
all I'm waiting to do is just remind people that, he's a fucking legend and I'm raising a toast. That's all I really wanted to do. It's just an oral toast to Ozzy Osbourne.
yeah, cheers to that. And I don't want to end it on a downer, but it will be a very dark day when he finally goes.
Well, yeah, I think we can't really, you can't ignore the fact that he he's he's got to be surely in a very vulnerable state. Um,
Yeah, yeah,
and yeah, that'll be a big one for me. That really will.
yeah. It will.
He's,
It
he's,
will.
he's been a huge part of my adult life. I think discovered Ozzy when I was about 16 or 17, I think, and very, very quickly became.
Which is a long time ago, I must add.
Yeah, bloody hell. I mean, we're going back 30 years. So
It's
it's three decades there, 3 decades of Ozzy being really fucking important to me.
yeah, it's entirely possible. Aussie was my first awareness of heavy metal. Because I don't know when that exactly was. I was listening to pop music as a little boy in the mid-80s. So I kind of heard it all and absorbed it all without really, paying massive attention outside of the pop artists I like with my sister. In '86, you had Europe, didn't you? You had Final Countdown, so that would have been there. I wasn't. I think Iron Maiden came up maybe a little bit later with other awareness, even though somewhere in time was '86. But I know around that time, Ozzy Osbourne piped up, and I remember liking Ozzy Osbourne, at least liking the song, and then forgetting about him. Well, not forgetting about him, but then not paying any more attention. But it was almost like Ozzy Osbourne, that because you don't forget a name like that as a kid, do you?
No.
That's the thing. That's a name that appeal to children. He knows what he's doing in that regard. So it's quite likely that I think Shot in the Dark was the first.
Well, that would make sense. Yeah, that era. Yeah, it would. He was on top of the pops doing Shot in the Dark.
Possibly Lightning Strikes. I don't know, but yeah, it probably is Shot in the Dark because again, it's a great song and I love that song.
It is a great song.
I expect I probably as a kid just because of that chorus. So
Yeah,
you know what? You say you moved on and you've forgotten about it, but maybe it planted the seed for 10, 11 years later on for everything to come to life.
Well, the honest truth is, I think because of my personality and how I was as a kid is probably why I didn't throw myself into metal because I was a bit of a shrinking violet for quite some time. But I also liked pop music. I liked chart music, so that was kind of my thing. And I had other interests as well. But as I said, I loved Can I Play with Madness and Iron Maiden, and that imprinted there. And it always seemed like whenever there was a big sort of rock or metal song in the charts, I liked it. I loved Poison by Alice Cooper. I loved You Could Be Mine by Guns N' Roses. I also I love God Gave Rock and Roll to You by Kiss.
Yay!
I love that song.
You know,
Yeah,
I liked some of the grunge stuff, but I didn't really get into it. But it was, you know, the heavy stuff, the metal stuff. I always really liked, and it's that's why in '96 when I saw Iron Maiden, I thought, you know what? I've always liked what I've heard from them. I've always liked heavy metal stuff, so let's give it a go. So you know, it was a very very gradual journey. It was raindrops, but yeah.
Yeah, well, you can semi-attribute that to Ozzy. So
I can. I think I can. Yeah.
There you go. Which I think is a great way to finish. But yeah, it's been fun just talking about the good times. I know there's a couple of negatives in there as well, but the good times. And you know, when we do eventually lose Ozzy Osbourne, one thing I hope that happens is there's some form of celebration of his music. It's not just a commemoration and a funeral and all that, the usual sorts of thing, but just a massive celebration of what Ozzy has given the world of music.
Yeah, giving me a massive smile, man.
Yeah,
there'll be a statue in Birmingham.
Yeah, 100%. Well, look, you've got a bridge, you've got a bench. Now let's have a fucking statue.
Oh, do you know what? That's one of the things I love about Birmingham is how much they embrace the kind of metal culture. You know, for obvious reasons. You know, we don't need to talk about, but they, you know, not just the Black Sabbath bridge, but you walk around and there's like Ozzy Osbourne graffiti spray painted up on the walls, all kinds of things. You know, they did the House of Metal exhibition there. You know, big up Birmingham because it's fucking great.
Up the villa. And on that note, we'll leave it there. Yeah, get that in. So yeah, that's it. We'll be back again next week with I don't know what. I believe the Holy Man is back from his pilgrimage, so I'm sure he'll have stories to tell. God fucking help us all. But until that point, thanks for listening, and as usual, stay metal.